noticed in my YouTube mentions that one critique of lefty pundits is that they haven't been touching the story of Julian Assange. If you follow mainstream media, you know that they're also not covering this story. One of our favorites on this show is Johnstone, and I know she's been covering it because she and Julian are both Australian natives. And Caitlin, even though she's not a mainstream journalist, is one of the best journalists in the world, in my humble opinion. So let's dive right in. Assange fights U.S. extradition in court hearing at Old Bailey. London. No. With one word, no. Australian-born WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange resumed his high-stakes legal battle against the U.S. government, which is trying to have him extradited. He faces a jail term of up to 175 years in the U.S. over the publication of secret U.S. intelligence and military documents. Assange, who is being held on remand at Belmarsh Prison after being refused bail in March, appeared at his hearing at the Old Bailey in London on Monday with his white hair neatly cut and wearing a dark suit. His clean-cut appearance marked a stark contrast from his disheveled appearance when he was arrested at the Ecuadorian embassy in Knightsbridge, his political refuge for 6.5 years, in April 2019, and dragged into a prison van. After confirming his name and date of birth, the 49-year-old was asked if he was prepared to consent to be extradited to the U.S. Assange paused before answering no. Supporters, including his partner Stella Morris and fashion designer Vivienne Westwood, were among those who gathered outside the court, claiming that his arrest was politically motivated. Assange's lawyers will argue that his prosecution would criminalize the application of ordinary journalistic methods to publish information in the public interest. Journalists and whistleblowers who reveal illegal activity by companies or governments and war crimes, such as the publications Julian has been charged for, should be protected from prosecution, Assange's attorney Jennifer Robinson said. Assange has been indicted on 18 espionage and computer misuse charges over secret U.S. military documents WikiLeaks published over a decade ago. Among the files released by WikiLeaks was a video of a 2007 Apache helicopter attack by American forces in Baghdad that killed 11 people, including 2 Reuters journalists. U.S. authorities allege that Assange conspired with U.S. Army intelligence analyst Chelsea Manning to hack into a Pentagon computer and release hundreds of thousands of secret diplomatic cables and military files on the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. They also say he conspired with members of hacking organizations and sought to recruit hackers to provide WikiLeaks with classified information. Assange's trial has been delayed because of the coronavirus pandemic and is expected to run until October 2nd. The first hour of the hearing was spent on housekeeping matters, including the procedures for dozens of journalists given unprecedented access to the court hearing via video link as a result of social distancing requirements. Assange's silk Queen's Counsel, Wikipedia. The term is recognized as an honorific. As members wear silk gowns of a particular design, see court dress, appointment as Queen's Counsel is known informally as receiving, obtaining, or taking silk, and QCs are often colloquially called silks. Edward Fitzgerald requested to spend an hour with his client, saying it was the first time he had seen him in 6 months. Just one witness was expected to give evidence to the court on the first day. I saw this live update on Twitter this morning. Judge Vanessa Bareitzer said that because she has already read the statements from Assange's witnesses herself, there was no reason for the court to hear them before cross-examination begins. So the judge is clearly against Assange. Here's a tweet by Kim.com. No witness more than 30 minutes. Assange had no contact with lawyers for 6 months. Approved journalists can't hear proceedings. 40 previously approved journalists and human rights organizations are now banned from the live feed. Her estimation? Kangaroo court. But if you've been following this story at all, you'll know that that's not surprising. Ian56 tweets, "The extradition and persecution of Julian Assange aims to kill off what little remains of the free press in the UK, US, and the West. The lack of outcry in the media at the persecution of a journalist for exposing war crimes and corruption proves we are ruled by criminals and not free. So if you haven't been following the story at all, that pretty much sums it up. And the guy in my mentions was bringing it up because he feels that journalists in the US and in the UK and in the West are cowards. And based on how easily accessible all of this information is to me, I'd have to agree with him. Caitlin Johnstone says, at a time of rapidly creeping authoritarianism, Assange's freedom is more crucial than ever. My home state of Victoria has become the center of attention in the anti-lockdown movement for its authoritarian crackdown against not just the people who are in violation of lockdown protocol, but people who merely post about staging future anti-lockdown protests on social media. Police have been breaking into people's homes and arresting them in front of their children under charges of incitement for posting about anti-lockdown protests on Facebook, drawing international headlines. This is obviously a major threat to human rights that sets a dangerous precedent and will have many undesirable knock-on effects, and it should be condemned unequivocally. This is crazy shit. Yes, this is awful. Incitement is going to be used to crack down on all sorts of protests, including on issues we agree with and think are worth protesting, explained Australian author and analyst Keaton Joshi of one such arrest. Every time I post about this, I am stunned by the number of people who seem furiously unwilling to draw any connection between what's happening above and the history of climate and anti-racist protest in Australia. Nothing about this is okay, including the comments justifying her arrest. And her is a pregnant woman who live streams a COVID arrest. A pregnant anti-lockdown protester has live streamed her arrest on social media and been charged for allegedly inciting a protest. If I didn't know Caitlin Johnstone, I would say this isn't even believable, that this actually can't even be happening. If you get all your news on the TV, you're not going to know anything about this. Back to Kate. Indeed, this ham-fisted approach seems to be a lot more popular among residents of Melbourne and the state of Victoria who are subjected to it than to a large portion of the outside world. Part of this discrepancy is due to Australia having an entire culture built around the phrase, "No worries, whatever you reckon's a fair thing." But another part is the fact that people in other self-proclaimed democracies are accustomed to having a Bill of Rights to protect them against such intrusive overreach. Many Australians are unaware of this, but we are in fact the only developed democracy that does not have a Bill of Rights built into its legal infrastructure. An inordinate amount of trust is instead placed upon our legislature and judicial system to always do the right thing on a case-by-case basis, a premise that has been fully discredited by things like the Facebook post arrests, the silencing of sexual assault victims in Victoria, the police raids on 2 Australian journalists last year, the almost instituted ban on reporting political corruption in Queensland, and the trial, conviction, sentencing, and imprisonment of a man entirely in secret whose very identity itself is classified, just to pick from a few very recent examples. As we've discussed previously, it's a guarantee that there will be authoritarian agendas rolled out during the COVID-19 pandemic which our rulers have no intention of ever fully rolling back. We know this because that's what always happens. The U.S. Patriot Act was mostly already written prior to 9/11, and the pre-planned Orwellian measures were simply slid in at a time of chaos and confusion when people were less likely to push back on creeping authoritarianism. Here is her tweet. They are rolling out the architecture of oppression now because they fear the people. The escalations in internet censorship and the escalations in surveillance are both directed at a last-ditch effort to control the masses before control is lost forever. The trouble is, we can't see it. For months, I've been getting many people telling me every day that I need to be sounding the alarm about this virus giving cover for an authoritarian power grab that will thrust us into a dystopia from which we will never recover. Few of them can agree on exactly what form this power grab is taking, and none can lucidly explain in their own words exactly what they know and how they know it when I ask them to, but they want me to write essays defending their viewpoint. It's not that they're wrong to be suspicious. Again, it's a guarantee that authoritarians and plutocrats are at the very least opportunistically shoring up power and wealth for themselves in a whole host of ways amid the confusing upheavals of 2020. It's just that I can't write essays which I can competently defend about things I cannot see. The level of evidence and argumentation that I apply to the rest of my work simply is not there at this time. I've been looking at this thing from every angle, and a powerful evidence-based argument for any kind of centralized, monolithic global power grab in relation to this virus just isn't forthcoming. This doesn't mean such a power grab doesn't exist. It just means that if it does exist, the bulk of it is happening in secret. And it is a very safe bet that there are at the very least a lot of agendas being planned within establishment power structures around the world which we would object to if they weren't hidden behind thick veils of corporate, financial, and government opacity. Which brings us to Julian Assange, whose extradition trial of world-shaping importance is set to resume a few hours from this writing. Assange started a leak publishing outlet on the premise that corrupt power can be fought with the light of truth. Corrupt power responded by smearing, torturing, and imprisoning him, thereby proving his thesis unassailably correct. The depravity of the powerful can only operate behind veils of secrecy, because if it happened out in the open, our greatly outnumbered rulers would risk finding themselves on the wrong end of a guillotine blade. Assange sought to hold power in check by reducing the amount of hiding space it has for its malfeasance, which is why he is currently behind bars. If we had transparency for the powerful as we ought, there wouldn't be any wild theorizing about what they're up to behind the walls of secrecy. Indeed, the various agendas that are doubtless being schemed toward by oligarchs and unaccountable government agencies wouldn't even exist, because people only plot such evils when they are out of the public eye. Whatever's going on with this virus would be clear as day, and the fact that people are paranoid and distrustful of authority figures about the matter is solely the fault of those authority figures' refusal to have transparency and accountability. The more secrecy the powerful are able to obtain, the more wars they start, the more exploitation, oppression, and thievery they can get away with, the more power they can steal from the people and shift to themselves, which is precisely why they are going after a journalist who made it his vocation to deprive them of secrecy. Here's a quotation by Alice Walker. Our children won't know about Assange in the same way that we have lost so many wonderful people. How many people know anything about John Brown, for instance? This great abolitionist who died for fighting for the rights of black people died for our freedom. They hide these people from us in this very way that they're doing with Julian Assange. They just lock them away. They kill them. And who are we to let this happen? As Jonathan Cook recently put it, Assange had to be made to suffer horribly and in public, to be made an example of, to deter other journalists from ever following in his footsteps. He is the modern equivalent of a severed head on a pike displayed at the city gates. We must not allow them to get away with this, especially now when transparency for the powerful is more important than ever. Looking at you, Australia. That's crazy shit about people getting locked up for posting on Facebook. Her statement that we're at a tipping point and that it could go either way is really true. I can feel it. We're at a moment, a peculiar moment in history, perhaps engineered. She tipped her hand with regard to 911. I think it's pretty clear that she believes it was an inside job. And all the people who scream about tinfoil hats, all the people who have been trained by mainstream media to scream about tinfoil hats. Authorities the world over seem ready to crush all of this dissent that wants to happen. And seemingly they have the machinery in place to enforce it. The only thing that can thwart them is information. If we don't all rise up together and insist on having the information that they don't want us to have, then we're all going to be subjugated. We're all going to be in servitude, and our children and grandchildren will be as well. Hell, we're already in servitude, but it's going to get a lot worse. We absolutely must stand up in solidarity for people like Julian Assange, Edward Snowden, and Chelsea Manning. They are absolute heroes. And if the world forgets them, it's going to be our fault.